First, it's hi to Washington, Oregon, California, Canada, Pennsylvania, New York, Germany, the Netherlands, and everywhere else. Just in-house, you guys in another city know that here in Atlanta they're trying to get together enough new people for me to keep going down here, and I have not been asking. I was going to tell this to people here just right before the meeting, but you guys out there I thought might get something out of it. I have not been checking. I know last night was another public get-together. I have not been keeping track of what kind of success you're having. I did ask Worth just before the meeting, does it seem to be working? Or is it, he said, yes, it's not working. What I wanted to point out was, without me even asking, I would bet you, I could almost bet that if you were doing the kinds of efficiency surveys that are done out in the ordinary world, that based upon the kind of, I'll tell you people, they got stacks and stacks of just all kinds of great handbills and little cards and flyers and all sorts of things. I bet if, what do they call it, the efficiency rating about how much you spend, like with advertisers, you spend $50 million, $50,000 for every one response or mail order. I would bet you guys, I'll just bet that you would say that you're now experiencing a whole new level of inefficiency. You understand about how much effort you're doing to get in every one person that looks like they might be semi-conscious and interested. Here's the point that this may be the final click to set some of you off to meet Buddha. Think about this. Think right quick so we can get going. Consider this, what you just said, and now consider what I'm faced with. Look at you, just any of you. Look at you that like maybe you have, 1 billion neurons, or you have 1,000 different possibilities to hear, to think in a new way. Consider the efficiency, or lack thereof, that somebody like me has to deal with. No offense to any of you personally, because I understand it. I got my own brain. But consider the kind of payoff I get. I get it down to a small number of people, and I still just on and on. And it's like I sent out constant flyers, and I'm talking about now with you people, of possibilities, and you're out there in the streets just dragging in, come in here, we'll have free coffee, come on in and listen. But I'm dealing with you who at any given time, I don't mean, of course, just me, Buddha and everybody else have put up with it, the same situation, put up with it. I had the same situation. Well, it's like you had a choice. But consider the matter of efficiency, and I don't mean just some byplay between you and I. Consider in your own mind that you're trying your best to think new thoughts. You're trying your best to be more conscious and less prejudicial, less one-sided. And look what you have to contend with. It's like for every X amount of millions or 50,000 efforts you make instead of dollars, how much return do you get? It's like you get one new thought maybe a week, or it's like you get 2 or 3 new neurons go, well, I mean, it's not bad, but I'm not sure I'm going to come back. Anyway. Next time. I already wrote. Thinking, literally, metaphorically, and symbolically. Any move past the literal is progress, and any understanding of the metaphorical, even more so. I would say something about the symbolic, but if I did, it would also, and would likely be exactly what I just said. But if it did, it would also probably be more or less what I just said, if not exactly. But if I did. One man didn't know anyone famous or powerful except himself, who he said was close enough. Fame is power in that weak wolves can hear hormones howl. Vanity has historically gotten a bad rap from 2 sources. First, from those who don't know how to do it, and secondly, from a few wolves who periodically pick up the vague scent of some faraway freedom beyond the confines and self-congratulatory comfort of the pack. The inevitable came knocking at one man's door, and he said, "Who's there?" And when there was no answer, he knew what was up. Dr. Blunt had a sign on his office wall that read, "Pain is just Pain's way of saying, hi, my name's Pain." Exacto factos. The simple enjoy seeing the handicapped attempt to cope. The more conscious seldom appear in the demographics of routine entertainment audiences. Cut me, Daddy, 9 to the bar. Someday I'll explain that one, I guess. No, I won't, not after that. Continued. How things work in spite of how things appear to work, and vice versa. Okay, try this one. Until Moses died, and I mean really died, Muhammad couldn't say anything. Now, take this allegorical series regarding how one certain mystic couldn't say anything until another previous one had died, really died, and figure out how you could use it in the effort to break from your own present mental position and think new things. The swearing of allegiance harbors a misfeasance in how, on the predictable, honor it bestows. Histolexical footnote. The civilian notion of the sacrilegious was an unwitting misinterpretation of a more conscious man's sense of the sacred. And thus it goes. Query. Why talk about man's mind when it's so loath to talk about itself? A man asked a mystic, does not the attempt to awaken consciousness amidst everyday life require that one walk an extremely thin line between the natural attraction to things mundane and the supernatural hunger for things extraordinary? And the alleged one replied, not only that, but pursuing such a life demands that you continue to walk a very thin line between everything and everything else. Helpful tip if you're going to the city. If you squint up your eyes real good, you can see less. Did I say eyes? Another great thing about being a critic, besides not having to know what you're talking about, is that you can apparently work up a head of passionate attack steam easier than those involved with what you're criticizing can or will stage a defense. Anyone desirous of further clarification on this point could consider the relative working relationship between life and man. The collective's overview of its own health and well-being. A herd always looks at individual originality as being of potentially epidemically dangerous dimensions. And yet another, yes, another distinguishing mark of everyday man. The simple do not mind explaining themselves. Mind? Hell, they wallow in it. And now from our uncivil hair salon, a proverb extension and update. Ignorance has a million mothers, enlightenment only one. Myths. According to how well you are, myths are either sugar-coated forms of reality or intense condensed ones. Not unlike how metaphors either mean something other than what they say or pinpoint exactly what they intend to. The better you get at dickering around with the electronics of the thing, the clearer becomes your ability to tune in to the fact that there is but one station transmitting. All else is a matter of the illusionary number of various distinct receivers. Theatrics don't help a damn bit, do they? Then again, if they do, then shame upon thee. Of all the tools, one of the great ones is unpredictability. I was about to lapse into theatrics again. Today's wrap-up. It's not so much that ordinary men couldn't understand what's going on if it was explained to them, but rather that they simply don't want it explained. Hey, Laszlo, is that really a rap? Well, if it ain't, I don't want to be here when one shows up. While under the influence of drugs or something, one day local conditions looked at mortal entertainment and said, "You call that entertainment?" Of course, to be fair about it, what the simple normally find to be entertaining and thus potentially informative is all they want to so find. No matter the temporary, disreputable state of local conditions, or the immediate vicinity, or hell for that matter, even you, life still knows how to look after itself. Okay, all right, okay. It does no good to tell a child not to play in traffic. Traffic plays in him. Rush hour definition: the enlightened, those with no vehicle preference. Theatrics. Whenever he had passed himself in the dark, one man would blow his horn and flash his lights. The more he did it, the gladder he was that Buddha was dead. Good and dead. Local conditions told one man, "If you renew your subscription now, it'll be like getting 34 issues free." And the guy thought, "Hell, I don't want 34 more issues." Originality is to a herd as a third leg is to a bicycle racer. If we had the time, we would perhaps herein pause for a few moments to reflect on how, in the hippodrome of man's mental competitions, so often what at first seems like a boon proves to be a bust. But alas, the old temporal restraints, don't you know? News from the transcendental world of finance and employment. The knowledgeable man will quickly price himself out of the market. As he passed the boundary marker of infinity, he thought to himself, and not a moment too soon. And now a carpet update. Yes, a silly man can be a happy man, as long as he is sillier than everyone else, and never takes it seriously, and never lets on. The king asked the royal mystical type person, "Why speak in metaphors when you can speak plainly?" And the would-be insightful one was suddenly, new to his personal condition, actually struck with some insight and mused to himself an extension of the question, to wit, why speak in metaphors when you don't have to speak at all? Our joke for the day goes like this. Some people in the city asked for a clearer definition of a certain term, so I obliged. The subconscious, another word for stupid. No sooner had the latest ratings been released than many a man muttered to himself, "I used to be a hit show." All knowledge of all awakened men has the middle name of specious. Attempting to ride the coattails, some amongst the routine intellectuals have adopted the nickname of potentially spurious, which of course is not the same, is meaningless, and lets them off the old mental hook in advance. Query: don't let city clock watchers tell you that time is of the essence. Nay, not of the essence, but rather that. Neural awareness based on temporal footings will suck the very essential potential from consciousness. I say, Max Mill, does this account for the scarcity of myths and allegories about time? And to himself a man plundered, just what are the odds of all this occurring simultaneously? The sole protection needed for anti-mental assault is originality of thought. Suddenly, moved by an urge or something, the man stood and proclaimed, "Humiliation without representation is, and quickly saved himself by noting, not to worry, I'm here." Moral: metaphors are forever, while the literal comes and goes. I do say, Orlando, that doesn't seem like much of a moral to me, And just then a whirlwind, which just beyond horizon had reaped the angry rhetoric of man, fell upon all the words and all who spoke them, only to leave as it had arrived, which is to say, metaphors are forever, while the literal comes and goes. One man's mind told him, "Don't patronize me." And he thought, "I don't see how it's possible." Query, why make fun of language when it doesn't make fun of you? Hey, what are you, some kind of comedian or something? The simple want to argue about everything. In the real world of art, only critics whine, never creators. The dumb want to deny everything. One chap had to go lay down after pondering along the road of considering, if humor is a simple man's attempt at metaphor, then why are religions always so serious? He nearly asked for a cold compress until also tossing around the potentials behind the words cold and compress. And even the outer regions of cortical mortical decided that it was better to leave well enough alone if well enough is all you've got. Oh, and one last thing. He did later wonder if he had momentarily confused the words compress and compass. As the city limit signs for eternity flashed past his window, the man said to himself, "And ne'er too quickly for me, old chum." Now from our secret rifle range, a short shooter's on the mark explication. All originality is a form of progress. From our You Knew That files, or at least you should have known it, if you're going to address a whole herd, you've got to speak even dumber than you would when speaking to an individual cow. Question time. Then why have there never been famous mystical teachers appearing in barnyards? Or why is it that all of them have shown up there? A certain fox who showed signs of nascent wings began to wonder if the notion of public renown did not actually conceal more than it revealed. See, if you do theatrics 5 times, it's lucky. Unless you go home and find an umbrella on your bed. Especially when it's not your type. How to live and die and not leave a trace. Don't die. It's not original. Take a tip from metaphors, damn it. The strange case of the young man who, one morning, upon attempting to put on his shoes, discovered that his left foot had become his right and his right foot his left. What a thoroughly puzzling case, wouldn't you say? If you recall, and even if you don't, we have of late been talking about what would be, or what I was describing as a form of intellectual progress, albeit non-lineal, although it sounds that way in words. That is, going from literal thinking to metaphorical thinking to symbolic thinking, and then perhaps even followed by the grand old father ellipsis. Last time, we were still at the point of describing how metaphorical thinking is not a constant companion, is not the constant ability, is not the constant manner in which any sizable segment of the human population thinks. Notwithstanding the fact that after the fact, critical commentary says that many human endeavors, works of art, particular literature, were metaphorical. And notwithstanding the fact that many people on the spot can be told that something is metaphorical and then go, oh, okay, and then forget it. And not to say that some reasonably city-level intellectual people cannot, a few times in their life, have a flash of interpreting something they have just heard of a mundane origin and almost be able to extract something of a metaphorical nature. But insofar as there being any sizable percentile of the human population at any time, and I had already given you some hint, you can at least knock out, discount in the high 90% of humans at any given time. But there are a very small number of people, and I'm still sort of lying and being charitable so as to try and keep you at least credulous to what I'm saying when I say high 90%. What if I told you the truth and told you it was less? You know, we're down to the small tenths of percents of 1%. I won't do that, though. Call me foolish, but at least call me charitable. But don't call me before 7:30. Who writes this stuff? I got your number. I know where you live. Metaphorical thinking, if a person could do that, and we're still not talking about a state of increased consciousness, we're not speaking of the state of enlightenment, we're not speaking of the experience itself, we're speaking about everything all around that kind of invisible maypole. And it's not really a linear travel to it, although I go along and make up metaphors such as the Orient Express and trying to get from Paris to Istanbul, climbing mountains and all that. But it is actually not linear. But around this central point, everything else that you can talk about is simply talking about it. And it's not the experience itself. But, be that as it may, metaphorical thinking, I would strongly suggest you, would surpass all sorts of well-established, well-accepted, apparent mystical disciplines of fasting, prayer, meditation. Because metaphorical thinking, once you see what it is, remember I was giving you the descriptions of literal being just the literal interpretation of what is said or what is thought, and that metaphorical would be that what is said / thought means something else, is intended to mean something else, is not intended, it's intended to mean what it does and something else. Whereas symbolic actually sounds like it means one thing, but the whole intent is something else. It's not meant literally whatsoever. So the metaphorical would be sort of an interim stage, a middle stage. But it would be that it would operate as a kind of tracking form of thinking that would run parallel to your continuing awareness of what is literally meant, with what you literally think about, of your own mind literally, apparently picking up the receptions from everywhere else, from other people, from television, from the newspapers, from whatever sources apparently, until you know better, are fueling this. Another joke, but never mind. But you do not lose awareness of that, which would be, as they call it, I think out in the street, losing touch with reality. You're still aware of that. So literal thought, see, not any of these, in a sense, replace the other. But you're going along like everyone else, and your mind is capable of hearing, processing, keeping track of the literal thought of humanity and of yourself. So that's still going along. But then you add to it, it's just running sort of in parallel to it, metaphorical thinking. And if I'm not haven't made this clear, the intention being, for the sake of what I'm describing, is that it's tracking whatever particular thing that you seem to be thinking about. The literal thinking going on is you're tracking it simultaneously. It's like you're almost your own form of metaphysical UN translator is that you're up there speaking Swahili, and in your own head you're translating it into Norwegian. You're not changing it. You're running a parallel thinking of it. That was indeed a most crude analogy. But don't thank me. Don't thank. It's all right. It's what I'm here for. The reality of it is a bit more complex than that, a bit more enriched, because you're not actually translating it to another language. You're not actually translating the literal. The literal is still going on, such as the speaker in Swahili. And it's not that it is right, wrong. You're not interfering with it whatsoever. You're not attempting to interpret it. You're not attempting to analyze it. It continues to run, which already you are in direct conflict with what is considered to be reasonable, especially up-to-date psychological thinking, which is up-to-date insofar as if you consider 2,500 years ago up-to-date, but you're still the same thing. To wit, know thyself. Study your thoughts. Consider where your mind is being more directly and less directly influenced by the subconscious. So you've already forgotten. I gave you a new definition. I gave you the real definition of the subconscious. They would say, ordinary thinking would now have it that one should be analyzing one's thoughts. And beyond that, if you have any possible psychological problems, which if you're not crazy, you do have some. Because only crazy people say they don't. In case you think that author thought up the idea of Catch-22 off on his own. Stole it from life. He just looked around just accidentally, which life is pretty good. I will point out, life has yet to sue anyone for plagiarism. And yet you talk about being ripped off. At any rate, all sane, sophisticated people will agree that they have at least small psychological problems. People who do not understand even what they're saying, they do understand that you got to say, yeah, I do. Or else you appear to be crazy. Everybody knows that now if you're just walking around sane. Which we're about to have. That old problem of symbolic thinking is now beginning to eat up metaphorical thinking, which in turn is beginning to kick allegorical thinking somewhere in its private parts, which being inside of symbolic thinking as it is, makes it go, what happened, what is that? And it's it giving itself heartburn. No need to thank me. I'm glad to clear this sort of matter up. But there is nothing to analyze worthwhile for a would-be mystic in literal thinking, which, again, if you're interested, even the publicly known and recalled literature, all the way from Far Eastern into the Mediterranean free Christian days, through Christianity and the medieval European Christian Jewish writers, Islamic writers, is just filled with those kinds of ideas that trying to have a remedial effect on thought is a waste of time. The leeway it has to go from the literal there to the useful mythical is very limited in that you have had the ideas of predestination. That is, whatever's, and I'm going to use some of their terminology from the religious world, they'll say things like, well, whatever goes through one's soul, which they're talking about the mind, all the kind of naughty thoughts you have, the kind of evil wishes that you directed toward other people, you're not responsible. And therefore, that's the easy way, is then say what you need is simply a conversion. That is, to sign over your name, to sign the book, to publicly swear allegiance to the church, to our religion, and then, screw it. Turn it over to God, because you can't help it. He'll work it out, just as long as you say, hey, I'm aware of the fact that things are kind of running amok here in my life, and I'm not doing what the church says I should, so I swear allegiance, I'll give them 10%, I'll sign, I'll be here twice a week, and have mercy on me. That's the one way. The other way, the small leeway from the publicly known apparent approaches to increasing one's position, increasing one's understanding, would be into such things as meditation, all of its various forms. The most direct perhaps being in the Hindu and Buddhist tradition of saying you sit and you let the mind run and you begin to watch it But whatever you do, don't fool with it. And then they have guesses as to what will happen. They have attempted verbal descriptions after the fact of people who have done it before, and they say such things as, if you keep watching it long enough, and if you're lucky. If you watch it long enough, and don't fool with it, because if you fool with it, it's like traffic going by and you have a preference of which cars you like. And it's like every time you do, you still got your finger and it drags you. Just a minute, it's like you got your finger caught in the door somewhere, and the car will drag you along and bang you around the pavement, and other cars will hit you. And it may take you weeks, months, years to come out of that daze again and go, I got to stop that. Then you go back to sitting and meditating. And they try to describe, the point is, if you will not put your hands on the cars going by, if you will not interfere with thoughts, don't try to analyze them. It is meaningless. Just let them go. And if you're lucky and you do it long enough, maybe one day suddenly traffic stops. And then it's, as the mystics like to call it, BT. Bingo time. See, even the description of what I was saying has some validity. Back to where we were. A kind of metaphorical thinking is a parallel thinking, but it is not an analyzation. It is not a touching of the literal thinking. It's not an interference whatsoever. You have all of the backward, stupid, literal-minded people still in you. And anyone who thinks they do not gives a whole new patina and glow to the term stupid, ordinary, and simple. I can assure you of that. You do not leave just because you can. If you move from California to Rhode Island and think, well, I am now 4 hours ahead of time than I used to be. I'm now 4 hours in the future. Of course, you got to stop that somewhere, because if you can live with that, then next thing you know, you're going to move to France. And then you're going to move to Pakistan. And it gets very complex, and I don't go into it now because it gives some people out in the viewing audience headaches. Don't patronize me. I was taking names as to who laughed at that one, by the way. Just because you were to move, if you catch the allegory here, just because you were to move from Caramel to Newport, you have not gained 4 hours in the future. Oh, all right, so you do, okay? But still, you're partially living in California. You cannot move out of one time zone without taking it with you, is the point. So to believe that you have, well, awakened people no longer have any stupidity. If I were more conscious, I know that all the dumb things in my life that I ever thought would go away. What's that noise? It's known as the consistent cosmic hum of traffic. Molecular, inescapable traffic hum. In case you like to guess where they got some of those ideas of what to chant when you're sitting and meditating. See, they forgot where it came from. Of course, it was harder to spot when they were doing that, and the only traffic going by was ox carts. But still, they should have known. They should have known. I warned them, and they wouldn't listen. I told them, I said the future and such mystical thinkers as Henry T. Ford and Herbert Dodge, they're just around the corner. Just around the corner. But would Vishnu and those cats listen to me? Nah. So they thought it had some great mystical significance. See, now they hear it, and I'm sure now they're going, he told us. Are we going to now take a quick test as to, can anyone tell me where I stopped the last sentence on what we're talking about? All right, I will. There is absolutely, just unconditionally, how further profitably can I push it verbally? Nothing whatsoever to be done about literal thinking. There is no such thing as a carnal, dumb, stupid, unenlightened mind in man from which he is to escape, which is, again, one of the safeguards. It's one of the kind of follies and kind of pathetic foolishness, childish foolishness of would-be mystics, weekend mystics, is to believe that you can, because as long as life, as long as you can keep yourself running in ways that go nowhere, then everything's stable. It's like just a few little harebrains or people with nothing to do periodically in the midst of the parade, the orderly parade of life via humanity marching along, and inside you have little people every now and then, grown people, that suddenly just, it's like the weekend or something, they get a few drinks in them and put a lampshade on their head and do a little dance, go, ugh. That doesn't mean anything. They come back to their senses Monday. There is no analyzation. There's nothing to be done about that kind of mind. There's nothing to be converted from. There's nothing to be, there's no escape possible from that, because that which people consider, the religious have always considered to be their carnal side, their evil side. And from a more scientific or a more secular view of people believing, well, there's a certain kind of ingrained or childish stupidity, the propensity to be literal-minded and parochial in our views. All of that, whether it seems to be religious or into a more intellectual context or even into a would-be spiritual context, like there's something in man that is lesser. There's something baser in man. There's something so crude and mundane as to be useless. It's something from which we should have outgrown, that we should have outgrown it, such as original sin, original stupidity, childishness, limited view. We got to snap out of it. There is nothing to be snapped out of. Now, at the ordinary view, or at the ordinary level, say, of science, technology, and things based upon literal thought, that whole idea is moot. And that is, as far as saying, well, we should strive to get away from that kind of outdated, feral, mammalian, territorial, defensive thinking and move up to the higher cortex and actually begin to think in ways that do man justice. Even though that is not possible and is going nowhere, it does no harm, because the kinds of people who now publicly are driven to say that are those engaged in activities based upon literal thinking, science. And so for them to say, this is where we need to be, you understand, it's them dancing with themselves. It's not hurting anything. They're dancing with themselves, they find agreeable, as everyone who dances with themselves do, they find agreeable, and they want to shout out to other people, come join us. Come join us, all of ye deluded, all of you still going to church and wasting time, come over here with us and dance. It's not doing any harm, but it's foolish. That is, it's useless if you think that it is going to increase one's own understanding or have anything to do with an extension of consciousness. Back to where we were. There is absolutely, positively, unconditionally nothing to be done, should be done, even attempted, having to do with literal thinking. It is the electrical chemical energy flowing through you that is as necessary, is as indigenous as is the same energy that makes your heart beat and your liver. It is just running right through you, and that's it. There is literal thinking. I could call it other things if I wanted to get into metaphors, but I don't, because we're trying to keep... Do I? Okay. There is literal thinking. The kinds of mythical and allegorical messages you could derive from even the publicly known, which is always of a crude sort, of mystical literature, even religious literature, as I said, has been insinuating the same thing about just don't fool with it. But then it goes far astray into such ideas as predestination or give your heart to the gods and let them work it out. In other words, just give it up. But even ordinary people can't do that. If they could, the word guilt would now have followed dinosaurs out of the dictionary. But people can't. A man attempting to awaken has got to, somewhere along the line, realize, that's why I'm beating it and kicking it, that kind of literal thinking, now I'm calling it literal. Ordinary people, psychologists would call it perhaps detrimental, unprofitable, subconscious influences. The religious could call it carnal-driven thinking, fleshy thinking, secular thinking, worldly thinking instead of spiritual, otherworldly, inspiring thinking. And scientists could call it crude, superstitious thinking instead of scientific thinking. But you understand, they're all, although they sound to be far removed and distinctive from one another, that one of them seems to be based upon superstition and ideas of otherworldly gods, and one seems to be based upon hard-nosed scientific. It's all the same thing, you understand, because it's all based on criticism. It's all saying that what men are thinking, ordinarily, it won't do. I mean, something's wrong. Which you've got that great safety catch right there. As long as you think something's wrong with that, you can end up wrestling with that tar baby how long do you plan to live? That's how long it goes. Life may not be fair, but it's just. All right, life may not keep you from having a headache, but it'll give you as much phony baloney aspirin as you can handle. How's that? The kind of non-interference, kind of non-preferential treatment that a man has to finally stumble across, or at least go ahead and think, well, Jesus, he's talked about it enough. Maybe it's true. Maybe I'll consider it. What you ordinarily think about is just noise. I mean, it's very important noise. If you weren't doing that, you would be in a catatonic state. Maybe that's what I need. A whole audience of people in comas. I do not want to think about that publicly at this moment. There is nothing to be done. It's just absolutely of no consequence, of no significance. And there's nothing to say after that. Those who know, I sure even hate to say that much, because after that people can say, well, wait a minute, that's one of those things about I'm okay, you're okay. That's one of those things about, well, the devil made me. It's nothing. I told you about as plain as came to mind to put it, that what you seem to be, to start with, and I'm saying thought-wise, and although psychology and religion and ordinary people have yet to come up to it, what seems to be your individuality is your thinking. I mean, that's it. It's only the simple sort say, well, my individuality is based upon the point that I've got very large breasts, or that I have a nice build, or that I have a huge beer gut, or that I'm too short. That's real simple. You know it. The real feeling of one's individuality is up here. And they can call it in here and all that crap. They're thinking. Were it not for thinking, you would not feel any more individual than does one dog from another, one slug from another. For those of you that like to deal in humility. Someday I'm really going to explain humility to you. I've explained it from 4 or 5, just kind of rolled up to the curb and opened the door of the limo and threatened to roll a body out your feet. But I've yet to actually roll a body out. I just opened the limo door. And you just think you see somebody in a fedora and the kind of, with a Tommy gun, and you keep waiting, and then I drive off with it. That is, I go to the next page. There is nothing whatsoever to be done, should be done, about literal thinking. As I've last several times pointed out, contraire, if you in fact could have something to do with it, you would have harmed yourself. That which may appear at first to be a boon would be a bust. Because should you indeed lose track of that, you have simply lost track of ordinary reality. You would be, for all intents and purposes, probably from Claxton, Georgia. And those of you who don't know that, that's the home of the world famous, the biggest baker of fruitcakes in the world. So there's nothing to be done, which, again, as I said, you can see it once, if you're interested, if you think right back to whatever religion you were brought up with, or any you've read about, all the mystical systems, all forms that approach any profitable form of meditation, they're all having to do indirectly with the fact of this. Just let it go in some way. They don't know exactly how to describe it. Just don't fool it. Just let it go, and it finally just wears itself out. That's about the best description they come up with in English. That some days it's like it suddenly just stops, and then you got it. There's nothing to be done. Literal thought is not to be avoided. It cannot be changed. Not the process. You can certainly change the content. But there's nothing to be done with it. Metaphorical thinking is a running of a parallel tracking of that thinking, but taking what is being said now and realizing it also continually, constantly means something else. Or those of you that like it more literally, can mean something else. Now that we've established that, strike can does mean something else. It is ordinary, literal-minded people that if they heard all this, they'd go, no, you're right the first time. You're saying it could mean something else. Because that's all metaphor is. That somebody maybe like got a poetic turn of mind, and they can hear something every now and then. They'll say, taxation without representation is tyranny. And they might go, wait a minute, that could mean a kind of organized pressure applied to one's thinking without getting your input can deplete your artistic resources. Even I understood that. And so this ordinary person could say, so that kind of metaphorical thinking, that is one interpretation. So you could take what happens literally in thought and say that it could be open to metaphorical interpretation. I didn't lose you again, did I? See, I backed up. See, I said can, and I said, now that I've said that, strike can, because it's not can, it constantly does. And I went back to this guy, my fictitious ordinary person, and made him go, wait, you went too fast. You were all right when you said everything. Of course, an ordinary person wouldn't go with everything. They'd say, wait a minute, as always, you, are they talking to me, have gone too far. But they would say, now I'll go with this. Some things that are said literally, some things, I might even go with many. Oh, I don't know, maybe I've been drinking. Some things could be open, some literal things that are said could be open to a metaphorical interpretation. They consider that probably a major display of their sophistication. Oh. Back to the kind of thing that Dr. Blunt would tell you were he offering this diagnosis. It's not that everything that's running out there in parallel thinking can be open to metaphorical interpretation. It certainly can, because that fits in. That's a local version of the universal. It can, but I was hoping that I could bypass that with you people after once saying yes, that's true. Everything is, which is the difference, as I was pointing out, between a few people here and there that in a spotty manner can apparently sort of think metaphorically. They're the ones that it seems to occur to them periodically that, wait a minute, that is, or that could be open to a metaphorical interpretation. Where's my rhyming dictionary? Where's my life of Robert Frost? Where's my framed picture, my pocket photograph of T.S. Eliot? And now right now, let's see, what was that? Taxation without, let's see. Now, if I thought about taxation instead of actually the government taking money from one, what if I thought taxation was like, all right, how about the people that run that poetry contest I always enter? They want me to pay to enter the thing, and they never let me vote, and I never win. Wait a minute, that's it. It's like the Philistines. It's all the old ordinary squares of the world. That's it. Let's see, now wait. Now how does it go? Taxation without representation is tyranny. All right. If taxation represents the opinion like of the Philistines, all these damn suits that run the contest every year at the gallery, at the port. All right, if that's taxation without representation, that is, they won't let us true artists in there. How about the thing's supposed to be for artists? Open show. But they never have anybody of my ilk up there. Where's my dictionary? What does ilk mean? They never have people like me as part of the panel to judge it. So, all right, wait a minute. Let me get, all right, taxation without representation. All right. If taxation is like the oppression of those Philistine dunder-headed suits without representation, that is my input, a real artist. If they don't let me have the input, then that's tyranny. That is, I'll never win. That explains it. That's why I'm still a nobody. See, you understand all I went through? That can be. If you got the real makings of a mystic, it's not can. It's when you realize that's when the ride really gets to be fun. It's no longer a drag. It's not can. It's not a going around searching for, wait a minute, how could I? Is it possible? Have I reached the level, the artistic, the metaphysical level that I can take just ordinary things sometimes and make them, if I really twist them and I squinch up my eyes real good, did I say eyes? That I can almost make this damn thing turn into a kind of an allegorical thing, a metaphorical thing, if I try. It's not a try, and it's not a matter that some things can. Those people who are now writing up on higher decks on the Orient Express. Don't tell me about mixing metaphors. I invented it. But so as not to worry and be left with it, I also provide the food processor to make it all palatable. Nay, nourishing. So the higher you move up in the compartments, the decks of the metaphysical Orient Express, the more enjoyable becomes the ride itself, rather than always sitting around, how close, will somebody tell me how close we are to Istanbul? Which is, of course, where would-be gurus and people show up. They come in instead of a little conductor's hat. Some of them wrap a towel around their head and they go, not long. Or they say, when's the last time you contributed? And you go, well, and you have to check, and they go, well, the distance varies. And then you realize, that kind of looks like James Brown circa 1957, in case you guys never saw him. And that's where he had the feet action down there. In a sense, in a real sense, using these figures metaphorically, of course, the Buddhas, the Confuciuses, the Laos, the Zoroasters, the Abrahams, Moseses, and Muhammads, and Jesuses of the world, the thing that makes what seems to be their kind of extraordinary words, why they're remembered and considered sacred many times, or even attributed directly to the gods, that God himself, the force of creation, was speaking through this man. And no matter what crude criticism you may have of anybody's religious sacred scripture, you got to, or you should by now be able to realize that there is something afoot for some little group of dots on a piece of paper, on a papyrus. Something has been going on for thousands of years and people still read it and just swear that they damn near swoon at times, that they damn near have mystical experience, or the words are just absolutely, the words are singular. There's nothing in their culture, there's nothing in their intellectual cache, there's nothing they have ever read, ever thought that touches just maybe just one sentence, these 2 or 3 sentences. What I was going to get at, that there is one real sense, and let's accept that without us making any comment on it, that there's some power therein to ordinary minds, to literal minds. The power is that those kinds of people that I was using allegorically, what I was going to suggest to you, even if their words are actually what they said and all that, was that those kinds of people were continually, did you say continually? Am I speaking too fast for you? Continually. See, that takes care of sometimes some things. Continually. Without interruption, without exception. They were still thinking literally. It was going through them. But they were continually, without interruption, without exception, with a blistering degree of consistency, thinking also metaphorically. Just like the heartbeat. Every thought that ran through them, literally, also it ran through it metaphorically. That, I was going to submit to you, alone has the potential to have an extraordinary impact, even a lasting impact upon people. Within given instances. No one person's words are ever going to have that kind of impact worldwide, or, I mean, it's all limited to local conditions of some sort. But it can have, that is the basis of why some things, no matter how they attempt to interpret it, I'm telling you that is the basis of it, that at the time, and it's still got its lingering effects from the grave, but at the time it was a kind of running metaphorical commentary directly, precisely tracking what was going on to those local people's literal thinking. That he was saying one thing, the words were quite plain. That's another thing that periodically is pointed out by even ordinary social commentators. They don't know what to make of it, but they will point out that hey, all these guys are remembered as being some kind of enlightened masters or godlike figures. They sure did talk plain. I mean, vis-a-vis contemporary poets of their time. They were just writing about erotic love or about the weather or about economics. Compared to the contemporaneous writers just in mundane fields, artistic, other areas, these were remembered and renowned mystics and etc. They sure did talk plain. That's because they were taking what was ordinary plain thinking, that is literal thinking at the time, in what they were doing. But still, it was like a thin line, if you like that one, that they were walking. Not them internally. They were having this consistent, uninterrupted metaphorical tracking of what was going on and them thinking simultaneously. But then they said it in a way that the metaphorical thinking was not all that removed from the common thinking that was going through this local group. It was just enough. It was like them throwing out the first pitch with just enough spin on it that it almost gave everybody that tried to catch it little tingles in their fingers. Them not having a glove and all. You understand? It's like tossing out the first pie of the season, and it was just hot enough to where they tried to catch it in their lips. It just burned them a little bit. 5, count them, 5 metaphors in one. And I didn't even include all that occurring on the Orient Express in mid-Atlantic. I was trying to stoke up the train to get us to symbolic thinking. But as has been noted, we have been running up that hill now for at least 3 nights and have yet to peak out. I give you my sacred word right here on my liver that next time we will get to symbolic thinking, the next stage in this trek westward. And we are going to get into symbolic thinking as how it lays the groundwork for originality, which is where all of this started a few nights ago, sort of. That originality is, once you realize it, and all this is kind of a setup, a kind of very handy, always present, always available, personal, individual, mystical discipline, which all of this, everything past literal thought has to do with originality. I went ahead and slipped in a few tonight when I said that all originality is a form of progress. That is, by the way, metaphorical, not just symbolic. Because in the ordinary world, all originality is a form of progress, except then it begins to be very subtle in that another one I threw in, that in a herd, all originality is seen as being potentially epidemically dangerous in its dimensions. That is, all originality starts off with the germ of being progress. Now we're talking about originality, and originality is never negative. It's not destruction. So it's not that somebody stands up and says, let's kill everybody that has green hair. Let's kill everybody that's not our religion or whatever. That is not originality. It could be the first time they heard it. But originality, if it is destructive, is not originality. So whatever it is, somebody says, hey, I believe the world is round. To use that old classic tale. Then instead of flat, I believe the world is round. And let's say, by those kind of fairy tales, historical fairy tales, that most of the people in that local area went, no, it's the accepted fact among our great thinkers, the world is flat. But a few people, if it's the right time, the right place, that is local conditions, it becomes a form of progress. It may not take immediately, but people are going, they don't, wait a minute, that makes sense. And they'll discuss it, and it takes a while. But it has to be original to be progress. All originality is a form of progress. It may be short-lived, it may be long-lived, it may be a dead end, it may be the wrong time, the wrong place for it to go any further. But past that point, inside of you, what all this is leading up to, if we ever get up to the top of the hill, all of this is leading to, internally, all original forms of thought that you can have is a form of progress. That is, to you personally, if this is your attempt to get to Istanbul, it draws you closer. That is, it draws you further away from literal thought, which is confining, which is repetitious, which is deadly. I'll tell you worse. It's damn boring. Tune in next time when it will be announced that there is no next time. Or there's always next time.